Hello and welcome to the Too Much Apparently podcast. If you're new here, this is a podcast for the deeply feeling, overthinking, emotionally overloaded humans who've been told they're too much apparently. And if you're back, thanks for choosing to sit with us again.
We're Alice and Carly, two therapists who are also just sensitive weirdos trying to make sense of life, healing, and our own brains. This isn't a professional advice podcast. It's more like the messy, honest conversations that happen when you finally feel safe enough to say what you're really thinking.
This space is for people like us, the ones who've been called too sensitive, too serious, too emotional, too intense, and have spent way too long believing that it's true.
Okay, on with the episode. Last week, we were speaking about small talk and surface level interactions and being someone who struggles with this and craves depth in their relationships and discussions.
We had so much to say about depth that we didn't even talk about half the things that we wanted to say.
So we made a part 2.
We're going to be talking about the beauty and burden of craving depth, why it's painful when we don't have it, how to move from small talk to having more depth in our relationships, and finally moving towards accepting this way of being in the world. So we've been talking a lot about depth, and I think some people, or maybe even a lot of people, can equate depth to being intense. And I wonder whether you've ever been labeled intense in a way that was meant as an insult and how you handled that.
Yeah, intensity can often go hand in hand with depth as well as too serious. And I don't think I've ever been called intense before. Too serious, I've definitely heard quite a bit, needing to lighten up. So whilst people have sometimes directly told me things like you're being too serious or you need to lighten up, it's not that deep, those kinds of things. Usually it's not directly said, it's more implied. It's more what is hidden beneath than people's responses or the way in which you get that silence after something that you've said or a certain look in someone's face or a joke or a quip that they've said. Sometimes people might even say, oh, that was such a therapist response. And actually, sometimes I might respond in a therapist way, but other times I'm just responding in a thoughtful way where I've actually thought about what you've said and wanted to give a meaningful reply. And I get that quite a bit, actually. And now I just make light of it. But those things do then make me feel intense. And it makes me feel intense in a negative way. It's not that, oh, people make me feel intense. Like, whew, what a compliment. It's, I hear that, whether they're implying it negatively, I certainly hear it and take it as it's a negative thing in a way that then makes me feel wrong. And like I got that interaction wrong. I was too much, too intense in that scenario. And I think the reason too serious comes up is often when you're having conversations of depth, but like they often are quite, do go in a serious way. You can have deep conversations that are not all serious and miserable and sad and depressing. But often when you get to depth, it's real. And often in realness is the seriousness of life and suffering and what we're experiencing. So looking back, I handled those things by shrinking to do it less. It's been really ingrained in me to then try to not be seen as too intense, which really butts up against the fact that I want depth. This is what I want, but I'm being told, or at least I'm feeling that, well, this then is not okay. It's not okay to be this way. So then I'm trying to not be that, but I don't know how to be anything but that. So I don't think I was too successful because I've still been continually trying to get that. It's more I've been trying to get that, but maybe more on eggshells. Like, I'm not overtly doing this now because I get negative feedback, but I'm just going to tread on eggshells and maybe see if I can get there because I still need and want this thing.
Yeah, well, that takes me back to what I was saying before again about that invitation to depth. And there is part of me too that it's just determined. It's just determined to try and get that.
I've shrunk myself, tread on eggshells, still trying to get this thing whilst not feeling a sense of rejection or getting it wrongness. Obviously still wanting it. And that's made me feel a certain way for many years. And a name got put to that feeling literally within the past year, I read an article about intellectual loneliness. And I thought, I've not heard this term before. And I read about the article, and it was a real light bulb moment that, that's put a name to what this thing is that I've experienced my whole life. And it's essentially just when those around you don't think the same way that you do. I have some really amazing friends and friendships, but I can often still feel lonely within those friendships and relationships at times because they might try to match me where I'm at, but they just don't think like me. Or family relationships, sometimes I can end up coming away just feeling a bit weird and wrong because they just don't get me. They're not going out of their way to make me feel lonely or unheard. They don't understand me. And I now have more therapist-y friends, of course, in the job that I do, who are capable of the depth, that I need and that I crave. I think it's important to note that intellectual loneliness isn't about being someone of high intellect and not being able to have smart conversations with people. That's how it can sound. And that might be it for some people, but essentially it is when those around you just don't think the same way that you do, leaving you lonely in the way that you are in the world, that you're missing out on something in your relationships that you're not able to have, leading to that sort of sense of intellectual loneliness. And because I don't have that in all of my relationships, I do end up being lonely. And it's only in the past few years, being a therapist in private practice and making a real effort to get to know other therapists in private practice, that I've got more therapist-y friends, such as yourself.
Yay.
Yay! And they are capable of the types of depth that I crave, which does really feel my soul. And so it's so lovely to be able to have that. And sometimes that makes me wonder, it's not that everybody needs to go out and find friends who are therapists. I do wonder, though, if people who have been in therapy or have done a lot of self-reflection, whether or not then we're more capable of sitting in the vulnerability required for that depth of connection. That's just something I wonder about.
Yeah, and when you're saying there about intellectual loneliness, which I think, you said it's not about being really smart and having really, clever conversations. My mind went to it being about curiosity and about being curious about things and asking questions and thinking deeply about things. What I also was thinking about is emotional loneliness. So you can be around people all the time, but if they're not inquiring about your emotions and not able to attune with your emotions, that there can be emotional loneliness as well.
Yes.
I think this is where I often struggle. I think I am a very emotional person. And I think for a lot of my life, that was positioned as a bad thing, as a kind of crazy, chaotic thing. And I've spoken before about this part of me that's quite feisty isn't the word that I would use for myself, but it's the word that's there right now. So my default is to go into this fight space, to be like, no, it is okay for me to be this way. And I am this way and I will not change, which sounds very powerful. But actually afterwards, it is followed by that shame spiral of, oh, I'm too much and I got it wrong. And did I misunderstand? And going around that loop. My mind's gone off in two different directions there. One is about, so to come back to what you were saying about when people have been in therapy, are they more able to sit with things? And I think, yes, that absolutely is true. And also that can lead to another kind of loneliness, that when you come in and do the work on yourself and you're more able to tolerate difficult emotions, it can really highlight the gap between you and people around you that really aren't interested in doing that. And there's something really important in valuing yourself still, even when this creates this wide gap between you and other people. And I think therapy helps you to begin to value yourself. And the way that I think about it is I'm thinking about the need to be your own rock sometimes. Just because you're on your own and feeling lonely and feeling like an outsider and all of those other things that can come when you're a deep emotional person, is that doesn't mean you're wrong. It doesn't mean there's something wrong with you or that you're doing it wrong. It just means you haven't yet found the people or enough people that are right for you, that there's that flow with. And I think one of the ways that I've filled some of that gap is by, so partly it is about, making friends with people. And I was really fortunate as part of my therapy training to meet some really wonderful people that I'm still in contact with. Been 10 years since I graduated, so we're still connected. And then, you and people like you. But outside of that is, I'm thinking about poets is one that comes to mind a lot for me, that actually there's so much vulnerability in poetry, and also like other role models. So if you don't have these role models in your day-to-day life, kind of looking wider for that. And, one that really comes to mind for me at the moment is Alona Mar, the rugby player. So she's on TikTok a lot, and she's just so authentic and just so real. And I really like that. So I think there's different ways to kind of surround yourself with people. So even if that isn't having a big group of friends that actually I would find kind of overwhelming, that you can get connection other ways as well.
What you were saying for those who have been in therapy and where there ends up being that gap between them and people, I think that comes up a lot. And again, that can then lead into that loneliness, especially when people's emotional intelligence is elevated through the work that they've done on themselves. It's then hard when you are with other people who maybe haven't done that for themselves. It creates that gap. And it's certainly something that I've noticed in my work, especially with people who have been in therapy longer term, where then that becomes almost a new issue.
Yeah. Yeah, it does. Yeah.
But even though that can be hard, I think like you were saying, that doesn't have to mean though that that's a bad thing. It's just telling you that you are now requiring, your needs have changed in your relationships, and you're now requiring something different in relationships. And if other people are not in a position where they can now match where you are, then it is finding new connections where people can start to match you. And I'm not putting that out there like that's a really easy thing to do.
Yeah.
I feel like there's been a bunch of things that you've said that have sparked off all these thoughts, and now I don't know what order to put them in. I should have just interjected. I was like, no, be patient and wait your turn. And then I was like, oh, but she said all these things, and now they feel a bit scattered. This may sound a bit scatty. You said something earlier about essentially saying that it's not like we're just out there doing it, being all vulnerable and happy about it. That it's something you and I are very much still working on, where I'm definitely really trying to do that a lot more now in my relationships because it's what I want. And then having to deal with the uncomfortable feelings that come up for me afterwards. I'm not just doing it and feeling okay about it. I'm now doing it, but coming away not always feeling okay about it, and then having to sit with that. But the reason that I'm really trying to do that now is because I do see my depth as a real strength, and I would never want to lose it. I love being deep. I feel that I engage in the world in a real meaningful way. I feel like I see the world in all of its color. I see all the nuance. I can hold contradicting thoughts and beliefs at the same time, multiple emotions about things all at once, and have really nourishing conversations with people. Kind of made me think, do I want the red or the blue pill like in the Matrix? And it's like, no, like red all the way. I want the truth. I need the truth. I don't want the deception.
So I don't actually know. Tell me about red pill and blue pill, because I don't like, what are you picking when you say red pill? Because that doesn't mean anything to me, really.
So in the film The Matrix with Keanu Reeves, he gets presented with a choice of, do you want to swallow the red pill or the blue pill? And it's become a common phrase as a representation for a choice, basically being presented with a choice of accepting an uncomfortable truth or remaining in a state of ignorance. Sort of, what's that phrase?
I don't know, but what's popped into my head is something that I have said for a really long time, which is that I would rather be hurt by the truth than be comforted by a lie.
Yes, there is a quote. I've actually wanted to get it tattooed for a while.
Oh.
It's from the series Six of Crows, which is from Shadow and Bone series, if there's any fantasy book readers in the house. Whoop, whoop. And it's, I really want to get it right. It's something like better painful truths than kind lies, I think is what it is. And when
Yeah.
I read that in the book, I was like, yes, that is
Mhm.
just me. I want the painful truths over the
Yeah.
kind lies. And the blue pill basically represents that ignorance is bliss.
Mhm.
And the
Yeah.
red pill is I want the uncomfortable truths.
Right.
I want the painful truths. You know, do you want the reality or do you kind of want the illusion, the rose tinted
Mhm.
glasses?
Mhm.
And I would pick the red pill every time.
Same.
Yeah.
Yeah, red pill every time. There's a bit of hesitation for me because I know that red pill is very, like it's part of incel culture, isn't it? And I don't know how they use it exactly.
That's not how I mean it.
I don't know what truths they think they're telling themselves.
Definitely
No,
not what we mean. No.
definitely not. No, but yeah, yeah. I guess that original meaning of I'd rather deal with the truth. Which so I think that also goes back a little bit to what we were just talking about in terms of the gap can create in relationships. That it doesn't actually create a gap; it brings your awareness to the gap that was already there.
That's so true. Yeah,
Mm.
absolutely. And whether or not
Wow.
you've come to recognize that through being in therapy and realizing the gap, or whether you've been aware that that gap has existed for a long time, knowing that you've had this need within you, and you spoke a little bit about it before, and where it does hurt. You know, we've spoken about the loneliness, fear of rejection, probably that classic both wanting to be seen and then not wanting to be seen at the
Yeah.
same time. And when we're craving depth, but only finding surface, which leads into that sense of isolation and loneliness, it is painful. And it's probably important to talk about how that hurt and pain has maybe shown up in our lives. How has it shown up for you?
Yeah. So as you're talking there, what's in my mind is that classic question of what's wrong with me. And I think so many people that I work with, and just so many people that I know, it comes back to this question of what's wrong with me. And actually, when I was thinking about this, for me, my first experience of that was being 2.5 years old
Wow,
at a play
that's
group.
a good
Yeah,
memory.
I can just remember pushing through the double doors into the play group and really having a sense of I don't belong here. I'm different somehow, which is kind of wild. And I don't really have an awful lot of explanation for why that is. Being neurodivergent, I feel like that kind of makes a bit more sense. I suspect there is also more to it. But yeah, that it's something that has always been there. And another aspect of it for me is my brain's popping in with psychoeducation now about how our brains are wired and that they're wired for connection, but they're also wired for safety. And you can't really get to the connection piece unless you feel safe. And that for various reasons, a lot of my life has been in survival mode, and that makes it really difficult to be in a social space. Like, how do you go to the pub and have chit chat about the latest celebrities or whatever? What holidays people are going on when actually behind the scene you're being pulled apart by somebody that you're in a relationship with, or a relationship with a parent is crumbling. These kind of really deep and difficult things that does make it really hard to do small talk.
Yes, yeah. Well, if you are
Mm.
somebody that has experienced early trauma in life, or trauma at that moment in time that these
Mhm.
connections, these conversations are happening, that is going to make it really difficult because there are a lot more important things going on in your world than
Mm.
what's going on with the latest celebrity. But
Yeah.
equally, if you're not someone who has had what might conventionally be seen as big traumas, even growing up in the world as a sensitive, deep, emotional, feeling person can often mean that you can end up being in survival mode on and off as you're trying to find your way in the world when your nervous system is contending with a lot more than maybe what other people's nervous systems are,
Mhm.
then that in and of itself has such a big impact that, again, that is going to make those connections difficult because it
Yeah.
is hard to connect when we are in
Mhm.
a state of being in survival mode. And when I say survival mode, I'm not talking about surviving for your life, in some
Yeah.
cases, of course, but when your nervous system goes into survival mode, the social situation you're in and of itself can be the threat,
Mhm.
which is then
Yeah.
going to make being really present and grounded in your body and being able to be you, whatever that means, in that setting difficult. So it's going to make it even harder to connect in a way that is going to feel meaningful.
Yeah, and I think about it in terms of psychological survival mode. So maybe there is no literal life or death, threat to your life, your physical body life. But yeah, the kind of psychological, your ability to cope psychologically. And I'm wondering whether anyone has coined the term invisible trauma yet. And if not, I feel like we should coin it. There is that trauma that I think is specific to um whether that's people that are highly sensitive through trauma. I'm thinking about the terms you've used before about it, is it innate or acquired sensitivity? That oftentimes the trauma is invisible. Like it doesn't, when you say trauma, you think it's this big thing, war or a road traffic accident, but that everyday drip, drip, drip of not being understood, not getting the connection that you need has such a big impact. Where the messages on a tiny level over and over again, you're not acceptable. That is traumatic. That is absolutely my soapbox. I will stand on it all day long.
I'm with you on the soapbox. I am with you
Yeah.
there. It is. And it is that chronic drip, drip, drip is
Mhm.
the best way to look at it. Because if you have someone who has experienced sort of chronic invalidation or chronically
Mhm.
feeling misunderstood in life and on the
Yeah.
outside, most people will have had experiences of that. But when it's chronic, when it's repeated, when it's that drip, 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 that then does become a form of psychological trauma. And that's going to impact you relationally and how you operate within those relationships. And
Mhm.
where then the hurt comes from. These things in
Mhm.
isolation can be
Mhm.
painful. Gosh,
Mhm.
when you put them then all together, well, we're
Mhm.
talking about hurt that basically is trauma.
Yeah. Yeah. And then so how do you go from that shrinking that comes with being told over and over again that you're not okay or you're not doing it right or whatever it is? How do you get from having these repeated messages of you're not okay to surviving small talk enough to get the depth of people?
Well, I think that's where the work is. And it's where the work is hard. I think it's
Yeah.
so hard
Yeah.
because we are talking about real hurt, real pain, real trauma. To go from trying to find a way to then accept the part of you that you have been traumatized by and been told you're wrong for, that you're not okay for. How do you
Mhm.
get from feeling I am wrong
Mhm.
to moving towards acceptance of, actually, my way of being in the world is okay, and then trying to be that way in
Mhm.
the world when the world hasn't changed? The messages
Yeah.
that you've been given all your life that have made you feel wrong hasn't changed. So I think that's what makes it really hard, because you can start to step into a place of, okay, I'm going to start to try to accept this thing by myself. But then how do I do that when the world's still going to give me the same messages?
Yeah.
Because the world can't handle my depth.
Yeah.
How
Yeah.
do you then do that? And I think that's the tricky transition. And I think that's why we have both said we're trying to do that, but we are
Yeah.
still coming away having to check in with the feelings that are coming up with ourselves, because we do still come away with the, I got that wrong, I shouldn't do
Mhm.
this. And I think it comes in stages of starting to move towards the idea that, oh, maybe this way of being in the world could be okay. I think that's sort of part one. And I think that in itself is hard. I've also only really reached that point till my 30s.
Mhm.
And only in recent years have now started to do the part two, which was trying to be that anyway in a world that still is going to give me negative messages back.
Mhm.
So, one thing that's coming to my mind when we were talking about our own histories of being hurt, and you shared your experience of going into the nursery at 2.5. I mean, people will come to know my memory is terrible. So anytime people remember things from when they were like so little just blows my mind. But a clear image that comes up in my mind is actually a picture that I drew in therapy a long time ago. And the picture that I drew was a family gathering. It was literally just stick people. So all these stick people at this family gathering, at this party, having a good time. And then I drew a pane of glass and I drew myself stood behind the pane of glass, just observing everybody else in this party having a good time, but me being on the outside. And I think I did a little speech bubble that just said something like, "Why can't anybody see me?"
Yeah.
I don't even know where that came from, but I think those were the first realizations of this even being a thing. I always knew that I struggled with small talk and that I felt a bit on the outside, but I don't think I felt the real significance of what this has actually meant for me in life till I started to really look at it. And after I drew that, that brought up so much of, oh, yes, this is how my life has felt, that I've always been behind this pane of glass, trying to be seen, wanting to be seen, but people just not seeing me. And in answer to your question about how we start to move forwards with this, is I think the pane of glass represents how other people have put me there, but I have also put me there.
Right.
And yes, not in a way that's self-blaming, in a way that people have given me messages. I have then internalized those messages and then I've shrunk. I've made myself invisible. I've made my voice quieter. I've not shared my opinion and I've not said the thing that's popped into my head because I self-monitor and I edit everything in all of these scenarios. And so that's both been done to me and been done by myself for safety. So, I have compassion for that part of me that's done that through a need to feel safe. But then it's also limited me massively. I just want to remove that pane of glass, be part of it. I think what I'm trying to say is what we were speaking about earlier. It's the not wanting to be seen and wanting to be seen at the same time. I'm trying to get rid of the not wanting to be seen part now. I want to remove that pane of glass and I want to be seen. Even if you're not capable of seeing me, I'm still going to be available to be seen. Does that make sense?
It does. It makes a lot of sense. And actually, I think it kind of feeds quite nicely into thinking around where is it safe to be deep? Where is it safe to be a deep kind of person? Because actually, my experience is quite different to your. Like the picture that I have in my head is that I will rush up onto a stage and tell everybody everything. And then, which actually kind of went fine for a while. So I used to write a blog about disordered eating. That was really, it was while I was going through a divorce. It was really raw. It was properly, raw. But I got a lot of positive feedback from people that enjoyed reading it. And then it must have been like 7 or 8 years later, somebody found some information that I'd written and used it against me in a really public, really humiliating way. And that was a real wake up call for me about, and actually kind of my immediate response at the time was, I will not be silenced. I will not change how I am. I really value who I am. And that is true. I absolutely still have that part of me that is that way. But I guess more subconscious, automatic part of me actually did still shrink and did go like, oh, maybe there is something
How
not
could
quite
you
right.
not? Yeah, how could you
Right.
not do that if
Right.
somebody,
Yeah.
yeah, that really sucks. I'm so sorry someone then did that because that came at a time when you were putting your vulnerable self out there, in a way where you were really getting that positive. That must have
Yeah.
felt really nice when you were in a really sort of dark, sounds like,
Yeah.
sort of more of a dark space with everything
Yeah.
that you were going through, putting this thing out there, getting something good from it, to then years later, what was a good thing be turned basically into a bad thing
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
that's horrible.
And there will be people that do that. And I think this is, so starting to think about the purpose of small talk and who do you want to be seen by and who can, I don't want to say who can tolerate seeing you. That's not a nice way to put it. But well, maybe there is something about that actually, if you reveal yourself in all your depth, that can make other people feel quite uncomfortable. So I think so how do you go from being a deep person who wants to be seen, who values the depth, but in social situations, it's like, oh, do we have to talk about this again? Can't we talk about something interesting? I read a book on small talk a few years ago now, and this guy actually set out 4 steps, which actually made me think, like, oh, maybe small talk has a purpose that I can get to grips with. And I think that felt, that's so like where you've described there, that sense of being an outsider. It kind of felt like the image that I'm getting in my head is like a gate in a fence. It's like this, the small talk can be a gate in the fence to connection. It's not where I want to stay, but I can find a way through.
Well, I think that's a good point because, we've spoken for, I don't know, maybe an hour and a half now about how much we love depth, want depth. It's painful that other people can't handle our depth.
Yeah.
And that's what we want. And it's important that we try to find more of that.
Yeah.
And we can't be deep in all situations because the world and people aren't always able to receive that. So even if we don't like small talk, and as much as I love the conversations where we just get straight in there, that's not always possible. And so small talk, it's important then that we don't demonize the small talk because it does have a purpose.
Yeah.
I think of small talk, again, I think there's 2 components related to the way in which small talk can present. So the first component of small talk, I think, is when it really does have a social purpose. I think it can almost be looked at as the glue that is holding those social interactions together, and where if we can do a bit of small talk, there's potential that with some people that could be a gate, to use your vision, into depth with some people. With others, it won't. But there is some small talk that I really value, and perhaps it's not small talk, maybe it's small phrase, small sentence. What I'm trying to say is when I walk my dogs, I really love it when people say good morning. If they do just make a quick comment on the weather, because it makes me feel a bit connected with my community. It's the classic, I know the names of all the dogs, but not the people that live here. But that is enough for me to feel like, oh, I'm a part of this community. You have acknowledged my existence, that I also live here. And that's all that I need. I don't need you to then come over and start talking to me or walking your dog with me, which has actually happened to me a couple of times. And I'm like, oh my God, please go away. I don't need that. But just acknowledgement of my existence here in this community, I actually really like that. So there are small phrases, but in passing, I do actually really like that. It makes me feel like I belong and that's all that I need. So I think those short exchanges can provide reassurance to me of belonging within the community.
Yeah.
But I also know in other situations, like at work or if you go to a class or something, that small talk, when you can engage with it, can be a gate to potentially more meaningful conversations. So I can see its purpose there. The second thought for me is where there is small talk that no matter what anyone says, I do not see its social purpose. Maybe it does for other people, but to me, that does not feel like social purpose. And that is when it goes on, and there is a full-blown conversation in small talk. I remember being at a social gathering and I was sat in the middle of the conversation, and for over 45 minutes, everyone was talking about the inconvenience of passwords. And like, oh yes, and then you can't remember whether you've got an exclamation mark on the end or whether you did an asterisk. And it went on for over 45. I don't know what else. I couldn't believe. I was sat there thinking, how are we still talking about the annoyance of passwords? Like, oh yeah, they are annoying. Like 5 minutes. Like, oh yeah, they are really annoying, aren't they? And you can't remember. And then they get you to change them every 6 months. And done. I couldn't understand how we were still talking about it. And it's that sort of small talk is
It's a barrier.
Soul sucking for me. It's draining. I'm not enjoying it. And I can't see that there's a purpose to that.
Right.
To that,
Yeah.
personally. I'd love to know what your thoughts are on. Yeah. Tell me what you
Well, so what I hear there is part of me wants to be a fly on the wall and analyze what was going on in that conversation. But what I think about is that sounds like small talk as a barrier to connection rather than small talk to deeper conversations. So when I said on the last episode that I want to be able to be better at it so I can enjoy it more, I think I mean more the second time. I've got no interest in talking for 45 minutes about passwords. I think from reading this book that I'd said about is being able to see that actually there are steps that I can take to go from these kind of surface level conversations that I don't really enjoy, that actually I can find really quite awkward. My next door neighbours are brilliant at small talk, but I'm terrible at it. And my feeling is like, oh, get me out of this situation. So yeah, being able to see it as kind of steps to connection. And there was something about that I found quite soothing. So he set it out in these 4 stages. So the first stage is small talk, which is kind of immediate comments on things that are going on around you, the classic of the weather, things like that. And then adding in the next 4 stages. So the next stage is fact disclosure. So this is where you'll share something factual, not very controversial. So it might be about what you do for a job or where you went to university or, something like that. And then when you get more comfortable with that, you move on to opinion disclosure, which would be revealing preferences about work or how you like to socialize, or something that reveals a bit more about yourself, but isn't, whereas somebody pushed back, you wouldn't feel very strongly about it. And then when you get comfortable with that phase, going on to emotion disclosure, which is where you're really in the depth then of how you're really feeling and things that matter deeply to you. And I really like that. It just feels like a kind of nice, neat to sort of follow formula, if you like. And of course, life never goes that way because other people probably haven't read the book. But it just felt like, oh, here's a path forward. So even though I don't really like small talk, just being able to see the value in it. But yeah, like you say, for when it's for connection, not as a barrier.
Yeah, as you were talking and sharing it, I can understand the appeal of that from okay, I have a formula, I have a guideline about how to do this thing. 'Cause part of me was thinking, so do other people just know those 4 steps inherently? Like, have they swallowed that book? Have they swallowed that manual as a child and they just do those steps? But when you were talking about it, I know you were saying, oh, I really liked it. And the first thought that came into my mind was, ugh, snore. Just thought, that sounds like it's so much effort to like, oh, got to work through these stages. And I know that this is very much talking more about my neurotype and how my brain works here. But for me, there's like, oh, I want to cut through all that. I don't want to do all that. And I know that there is a purpose to it. I guess I just don't like that there's a purpose to it. I just like to, let's just scrap that.
Just go in there. Yeah. And so as I was thinking about talking about it today, I was wondering a little bit about how did that fit how we got to know each other? So even though I didn't have that as a framework, and I don't hold it as a framework in my mind, I don't meet people and go, oh, right, now we're at the small talk phase and now we're at the fact disclosure phase. I don't. It's more like, this is how I can get to the depth I want. That's how I see it, is I want the depth, but here are the different phases that I need to go to get there. So I was just trying to kind of pondering a little bit on, and I haven't actually got the answer to that. But I think that, I suppose every relationship goes through this kind of dance of, I think even for me as somebody who will be quite open and will share things that other people are a bit like, oh, that's a lot, which is a response I have literally had once before, that there are other things that I'm only going to tell you if you really get to know me and kind of show me that you're safe for me to reveal that.
Yeah, I think what I have tried to do over the years, I do have some small talk scripts in my mind of things that I can say. There is a bit of panic when they run out and now I don't know what to say next. But also, what I've started to try to do to glean a bit more from people so I've got a bit more to work with. Because if I say, "Oh, how are you?" I know I'm going to get pretty much fine, not too bad, or really good, I'm not,
Mm.
they're not going to start telling me about their life and what's actually, how they actually are and what's been going on. So I've tried to adapt, or I'm trying to adapt how I'm formulating my questions. So other people might just say, "How are you? How's work?" But I want to try to open them up a little bit in a way that can invite giving me more information, but not in a way that is going to depth or is scary. So I used to work a lot like with teenagers. And for example, when you might say to your teenager or child when they come home from school, you might say, "Oh, how was school?" And they might just go, "Yeah, all right, oh, fine," or mumble if they're a teen. You might not get much of a response. So if you just say, "Oh, how was school today?" you might not get much. But if you were to say, "What was the best thing about your day at school today?" Well, you can't just go, "Hmm." You have to actually give an answer to that
Yeah.
question.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm trying to think of how can you adapt that, not just for teenagers that you're trying to connect with, but actually for people
Yeah.
in day-to-day life. So rather than just saying, "How's work?" asking, "What are you really enjoying in your work at the
Yeah.
moment?"
Mm-hmm. What are you finding challenging?
So I'm just trying to think of questions that you might ask in a way that you can expand them a bit more to get a little bit more information. So that then I've got a little bit more to work with because I don't know how to follow up from "How's work going at the moment?" "Oh, yeah, it's all right, bit busy." Like, I don't now have anything to work with. I can't
Yeah.
then just jump to my next script that might not connect. I don't know how to do
Yeah.
that. So I think it's less about, right, I'm trying to make you go deep, and more about how can I ask you a question to tease out more information so that then I've got a bit more to work with. Because otherwise, I don't know what to do next.
Yeah. 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 I think there's something there for me also about the shared responsibility of the flow of the conversation. Like sometimes I would see myself as bad at small talk, but the other person would come with closed answers. And it is really hard to get a conversation to flow if what you're getting closed down.
That leads me to wonder how come throughout our lives we have always been made to feel wrong for our way of being in the world
Mhm.
when, not to toot my own horn, but I think I'm quite a good conversationalist when the conversation is real.
Yeah.
So why am I having to try to figure out how to do this small talk dance to get to depth when, yeah, like you say, if you're met with closed answers, of course, I don't really know how to take that net.
Mhm.
And I also don't know what to do with a 45-minute conversation on passwords. So I feel like
Yeah.
other people have to come on, give a little,
Hmm. Yeah.
considering these challenges.
Mhm.
Considering that we can't influence how other people are going to be, what effort they will make, or
Mhm.
they're willing to sort of try to meet you a bit more halfway to have more depth. How do we then start to make peace with our depth, with our way of being in the world, when there are just going to be some people who do feel like the idiot that said to you, "That's a lot"? How do we find a way to embrace that part of us, knowing that for some people it will be a lot? Not that we're being a lot, but for
Mhm.
them, they don't know what to do with that. So
Mhm.
how do we stop seeing our seriousness, our intensity, our depth as wrong or something to apologize for?
Mhm. So for me, it comes back to this determined part of me that even though I've been made to feel wrong, that there is a part of, and there always has been a part of me that knows that I'm not wrong. So for me, it's been about really connecting more with that part of me and asking myself over and over again, what do I think? What do I think about how serious I am? And not just relying on other people's opinions all the time. That's been the big thing for me. And like how I said before, seeking out similar people.
Yes. Yeah.
Mm.
I would say you've always had that voice of it's
Mm.
okay to be me. And yeah, at times it was quiet, but it was there. For me, it was about creating that voice to begin with because I don't really think it was there. If it was very, very quiet, very, very small.
Yeah.
It was finding that voice to begin with, trying to help it to grow and reaching a point where I stopped wishing, at least in this regards, and I'm not saying it still doesn't come up sometimes, but stopping stopping wishing that I was more like them and wanting to be more like that. Actually, I like my depth. I like it. It's not how other people are, that's not me. And I like being able to try to be more vulnerable. I like the connection that comes after that, even when some awkwardness has followed or I've been worried about how it's been received. It sounds so meaningful when it's been received in a really nice way. And I know that my seriousness comes from my empathy, my truth seeking, my curiosity about people and everything in the world. I just really want to be there for my friends, really know my friends inside out. And it's okay for me to want more from them. That is a good thing, to want that in your relationships. And it's okay if I feel sad and lonely when people can't give me that. Maybe that can just be okay. So I think you said the key thing about also trying to make connections with people who are also more like you, because the more then I've been around people who don't tolerate my depth, enjoy my depth. They're like, bring me the depth. I think you said that earlier when you were talking about when I cried in front of you. That helps me see that I don't need to water myself down because people are telling me that they're having a good time with me, that they love talking to me. So it's something that I'm still working on, and I'm trying to be more of my deep self around people that aren't deep too. That's the tricky part. And I think it's just trying to find people who are more like you, and maybe trying to spend time in spaces where you might be more likely to find people like that. I mean, you mentioned poetry earlier. If you're someone who likes poetry, or if there is a local poetry class, you will probably find deep people there. So maybe there are certain spaces that we could make an effort to occupy and be in that then might mean we're going to connect with more people who are on our wavelength. So if you've been listening to this and you've been told to lighten up or not take things so seriously, or, oh, that was a lot, that doesn't mean that you're wrong. It just means that you value something that they don't.
Depth is a gift. The world needs people who care enough to go deeper.
And sure, small talk has its place, but so does talking about the big, raw, complicated things.
So maybe this week, notice who you feel more yourself around. Who makes space for the good stuff? Next time, we're talking about being too tired for life, that deep bone level exhaustion that makes even the basics feel impossible.
When you're running on fumes, still trying to show up for everything and everyone and wondering why just rest doesn't actually fix it.
We'll get into burnout, emotional fatigue, and why sensitive, deep-feeling people hit this wall more often and harder than most.
And we'll talk about how to care for yourself when you're already running on empty without it becoming another thing on your to-do list.
That's all from us today. If this episode made you feel a bit less alone, the best way to help us reach more people is to subscribe, rate the podcast, and follow Too Much Apparently on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube.
Those simple clicks help other sensitive humans find us when they need it most. Thanks for listening, and we'll be back soon.